Andy, welcome.
Thanks, Dr. Mike. It's great to be with you.
It's great to have you back. And for those who don't know, Andy Kaufman, he is the interviewer behind the People and Projects podcast. He's a project management trainer, but most people know him through that podcast. How many episodes is it? It must be well over 300 now.
348, something like that. Yeah.
Wow, 348. Yeah. So if you want more of Andy, or if you want more of project management, or if you just need some CPD points or some PDs, then hit up the People and Projects podcast after you've heard what Andy has to say. So let's start with, what are your 3 top tips for project managers?
So I really love how you tee it up in the questions. And so what I started thinking about was, in our project management workshops, what is it that if I run into somebody a year or two later that they remember? Because there's probably a lot they don't remember, a year or like a day or 2 or 3 afterwards.
Yeah, after lunch.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But what's interesting is, one of the most consistent things they say is, I get stakes in the ground. Okay, so let me tell you about this. This comes from an interview that I had with a guy named Piers Steele. He's a Canadian author, a scientist by training, and he wrote a book called The Procrastination Equation. The guy, he boiled procrastination down to a formula, which is fascinating, but that's really not the project management point. The point is, he shows a chart multiple times in the book where on the far left would be like the start of a project or a to-do. On the far right would be the end. So horizontal axis is time, vertical axis is motivation. And I ask people in workshops, like, what do you think that curve looks like? Do you think motivation is linear all through? It's like, Mike, what would you say motivation looks like from the start of a to-do or action, either an action item or a project, to the end? What do you think that looks like?
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah, you get a boost and then it dips, and then exactly. There are peaks where you have successive, which of course is why we set milestones, isn't it?
Right. That's really the point. Because what when people draw it on the screen or whatever, a lot of times people say, oh, it drops off a cliff. In Dan Pink's book about timing, he says it's like a U, like it starts out really good and then the panic in. But what Piers still draws it is, as you might guess, it's like low, and then there's kind of like the panic at the end, right? And so his antidote for that, for procrastination, is, like you said, like it's getting these milestones along the way. So in the class, we refer to it as getting stakes in the ground, but you can call them milestones, you can call them, people call them by many different things, but a simple idea like that. And it can show up like there was a consulting firm that hired us to create a facilitation skills class, and left to my own devices, Mike, I would have squandered the January and February and March. I would have started thinking about April and May. I wouldn't have slept, it would have been that. I got a weekly check-in. It's just a weekly check-in. That was the stakes in the ground. And the work, it tended to be on Thursdays. The work tended to go Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, right? And then Friday, Saturday, Sunday. As I got close to Thursday, the work picked up. A simple little thing like a stake in the ground or milestones. And then this would be the caveat that I've had to add to it for my own personal projects, is those stakes no more than 2 weeks out. Because if you give them like 2 months out, it's the same sort of thing.
It's too much delay, isn't it?
Right, yeah, it's too much. But there's something about, there's just enough cognitive urgency if it's 2 weeks or less, or 5 to 10 business days. As just a rough measure. And if it's a 3-year project, the things that are 10 months out or 2 years out, maybe not the same sort of thing. But the near term stuff, 5 to 10 business days. I'm to the point now where I don't want to say never, rarely, if ever, will give somebody more than 5 to 10 business days when I assign work. It's got to be shorter than that, because otherwise it'll just go extend. Right?
Yeah. I've called that rallying points. When you build a plan, you build rallying points into the plan where everyone, or a significant chunk of the team, comes together to, or at least their work streams or their threads of work all come together. So everyone's working towards those rally points. So I like that a lot. I think that's really interesting. And then, funnily enough, when I said milestones, I was thinking of it from the other point of view, that motivation peaks, not in my way I was thinking when you mentioned it, was not about motivation in the run up to the milestone, but actually we achieve the milestone, then it's that kind of rah moment and everyone feels good. And
that's a great point. And right, there's something about this sense of progress. I think you're right on that. This is years ago now. Teresa Mobley.
I was going to mention that, Stephen Kramer.
Yeah, right, exactly. I had Stephen on the podcast, and we talked about the progress principle. And one of the biggest messages out of that book, as you know, is we might not be where we want to be, but we're not where we were, right? There is this sense that we're making progress. I think you're exactly right. That it has that benefit. And the other benefit we found is sometimes it feels like we're working with somebody who's kind of dragging their feet. And it's probably not because they're a slacker. It could be they have other priorities. It could be we've assigned them other work that's a distraction. But if you're working with somebody who it feels like you're concerned that they're going to not be staying on things, get a stake in the ground. Tell them, hey, by the way, next Tuesday, you're on the agenda to present on this. And they might go, oh, Mike, I won't be ready. Say, oh, no, that's okay. Just give us an update. What we find is you get closer to Tuesday, the work picks up. So it can keep us on track and keep other people on track. And as you added a great addition there, it gives us a rallying point to celebrate. Yeah, just simple idea. It's borrowing an idea from Agile, but good project management's always been Agile, right? So it's having these regular short check-ins. It's just a simple idea that almost anybody can implement. Brilliant. Great start. That's the first one under our belt. Okay. So a lot of times people talk about the triangle with projects and, some sort of trade-off. Instead of saying that one, because a lot of times people tell me they remember that from the class, but there's a variation on that one. And that is, well, first of all, not if change, it's when change happens. Yeah. Right? It's not if change, it's when change happens. Like you can go to whatever sort of model you want of looking for trade-offs and things like that. But what I see too many people do is they focus on what they can't do. So someone said scope, like, no, we can't do that. Or they want to accelerate the time. No, we can't do that. Instead of focusing on what you can't do, focusing on what you can do. So if someone comes up there and they give you something, it's like, there's no way that is going to fit in that sort of time frame. Instead of being the no person, which a lot of project managers, I'm not saying by title, but by role, a lot of us sometimes get to be known as the no person. Yeah. Like, hey, can we do this? No. And so I got this from the book, The Irreverent Guide to Project Management. and it's a pretty clever book, but he talks about having a can-do, not a can-do attitude, but a can-do approach. Instead of focusing on what you can't do, say, well, here's some options of what we can do, and bringing some options to the table instead of being the no person, but bringing the options to the table shows you're trying to bring solutions, right? You're not just talking about problems, you're trying to bring solutions, and it shows that you're really trying. What's your thoughts about that, Mike? I immediately thought of the book Solution Focus, but you introduced this with mentioning the triangle of constraint, which a lot of people think actually constrains us. But I always, and I think of it as a tetrahedron, because in the US you talk about time, cost, and scope. In the UK we tend to talk about time, cost, and quality. Why not have all four? But I think of that as I use that in terms of yes if you want this, instead of saying no, yes if you want more, you want more functionality, yes if you'll give me more time, yes if you'll give me more money, yes if you'll let me cut some corners. You want to save budget, yes if you allow me to cut the scope down or reduce the quality, or you give me more. So actually that link for me is spot on. Oh man, it's absolutely. And an executive once told me, he was a CIO. He called it yes, but I like the yes if is better because the but kind of erases everything in front of it. As soon as you hear but, it's just exactly everything. If I say to my wife, I'm sorry for getting upset, but you made me. No, it's like not going to work. But this idea of yes, this bias towards yes, I think is something that we need to reinforce in our industry, our field. That I think, it was a CEO of a mid-size company in my hometown of Chicago. She was walking me through, introduced me to a bunch of people, and later on she goes, "Hey, remember that one project manager?" And I did remember because she introduced me, but she goes, "He's the no guy." I'm like, "What do you mean?" Because it doesn't matter what the question is, the answer is no. Can we fit the scope in? No. We're gonna hit the date? No. It seemed like no matter what the question. And so I asked her, "How's that working for him?" And she said, "He's about ready to get fired." And there are times we need to say no, right? If it's an ethical, if it's a compliance, if it's a quality thing, there's times where we need to say no. But so many times, if we would just take your advice there of whatever, however we define the geometric shape, right? If what are the trade-offs that show it is possible, or at least more likely, maybe not guaranteed, but it is at least more likely, and it fosters this sense of, well, what would it take? So your idea of yes, if, add in this, focus on what we can do instead of what we can't do.
Yeah, brilliant. I like that a lot. And actually, I've always thought of project managers primarily as can-do people. If you want to be that no person, then become a finance director, or a compliance officer, or but yeah, I love that, and I think we need to find smarter ways of delivering stuff for our clients that meets their needs, but also doesn't compromise the things that matter. And like you say, compliance, certain health and safety, certain ethical things, they're not negotiable. Mm-hmm. But yes, I can do that if we can find a way to make it ethical, if we can find a way to make it safe. Great. And your third tip, Andy?
Well, it feels like that I can't imagine trying to lead projects without something to do with risk, right? And you've got so much great content on risk. And so I'd point people to search your channel for risk and they'll get everything they need. One specific tip to risk, beyond the typical process, that I found has been really, really helpful is every time you have an update meeting with your boss or with the client, depending on the context of someone's project, talk about your top 3 risks. So use whatever methodologies you use to get to there, but have this ongoing conversation about risk. Risk has to be like breathing on a project. It's not like, oh, Andy brought up a risk. Because that it'd be like, of course you brought up risk. We talk about risks all the time, and not just saying what the risk is, but also what are we doing about it? Yeah. So Mike, off the top of your head, like what would be the advantage of not just responding if someone asks, but like proactively, we're bringing up risks at every meeting. It's just a normal thing.
Well, I mean, the main benefit for me bringing out risk at every meeting is that it regularizes it. It makes us realize that risk is part of project, and it is part of the definition of a project. Projects are, by definition, big and scary and unusual, and that means they have risks because there's uncertainty. And if you're not talking about risk, you're not really talking about the project.
That's a good point. Yeah. Is it a Tim Lister quote that risk management is how adults run projects? I think it's something like that. Yeah.
Although I always have a corollary to that, which is stakeholder engagement is how sophisticated adults.
Oh, I like it.
Where do so many of our risks come from?
Right. Exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah.
Tim and I'm not met him, but we are on the same wavelength there. And I feel a bit cheeky in doing that, but yeah, exactly. If you know how to run a project, then the things you need to focus on are the risks, because they're the things that are going to derail you that are outside of your control.
And it's almost no downside to bring it up, like even if it's with a boss, because it's not an issue, it's a risk. Yeah. And like my friends in the south of the US say, a risk is something you smell, an issue is something you stepped in, right? So we haven't stepped in it yet, right? We just, so we're not complaining, we're not whining, we're bringing potential solutions. And the leader might go, all right, Mike, thanks for bringing that. Thanks for letting me know. Or they might go, oh, Mike, yeah, our Susan has worked with that. You might want to check in with Susan and see if she has some ideas out. Right? They can redirect us. They can give us more information. They can use their organizational influence to help deal with those risks. And if the risk never turns into an issue or never turns into a problem, it's great leadership on our part, right? Because it never happened. So it's almost like zero downside. So
there's another big upside. In the UK, we have Prince 2 as a major methodology in government sector. And part of that is a stage gate process, or a gateway review process, as it's called here. And I got to know a very senior former civil servant who runs gateway reviews, or ran gateway reviews. And he said, we know that if we sit and review a big project, there will be things going wrong. There will be all sorts of risks. There will be all sorts of, issues that they are dealing with. We're not stupid. We don't expect everything to be perfect. The one thing we care about is, does the project manager know about them? And has the project manager got a plan to deal with them? If you're bringing out risks with a sophisticated client or sponsor or boss, then they will expect there to be risks, and they will be able to assess your capability at handling them. And that's what should be mattering to them, not the fact that you don't have them, but that you can handle them.
That's so wise, Mike, because what more people tell me is I'm afraid to bring up the risk because I think I'll look bad or like I'm not in control. Where the truth is, I think you nailed it. It's quite the opposite, that it looks like you are on top of things. If somebody goes, nothing to see, move along, that shows I'm clueless. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well said.
Perfect. That takes us to your two tools. And of course, I'm telling people these don't have to, a lot of people will go for software tools, and you may have done so, but your brief is to any type of tool, from a thinking tool to a software tool to a diagram or a template. What's the first of your top tools for project managers?
I teach in 3 MBA programs at Loyola's Business School in Chicago. And one of my MBA students just said, hey, outside of class, can we just connect? Because he goes, I buy into what you're saying in the class, but our company has no process. It's chaos. Every week it's something new. And he goes, I'm trying to figure out what to do. So I spent a lot of time listening to him, Mike. And as best I could tell, they really, when they were making all these decisions, they didn't know what was on their plate. And so what I recommend is I don't care what software tool you use, but you need to visualize the work, what's on the plate. And what he found, as we talked about it, because we're just working through the class, what he went through, the Kanban board idea. It doesn't have to be a pure Scrum board or Kanban board, but this idea of get something that is so visible. So he has a wall, pretty open wall. He was originally thinking whiteboard, but there's too many notes for the whiteboard that he was thinking. But it's like, get it up on this wall and have some simple sense of where things at. And so not only does he see it, which is good, but also his team walks by, they see it. He could walk the senior leaders over to it. So whether it is as simple as with some sort of sticky note or using, like on the team that I manage, within my company, we tend to use Asana primarily at home. My wife and I, we use a Trello for my honeydew list, but for him, we think, because they're primarily back in the office now. And so he thinks just having that visible, and what we find, and I'm sure you find this all with all kinds of people you talk to, we often just don't know what's on our plate, so to speak. And it just visualizes the work. Where's it at? And you get a little bit of what you talked about of the celebration when it gets to done. There's this sense of, it's like checking off something on your to-do list. So you get almost like that, neurological effect too, of like, yeah, we got it. So
it's also the case that the first step in dealing with a sense of feeling overwhelmed is to actually corral it. Because as soon as you've got all that stuff there, it's there. You've now got control of it. It might look like a lot, but it's your lot, and you've put it there, and you can take it off. You can start to work it. I'm a big fan of actually, as you say, physical visualizations. I love software, and there are times when it's perfect. But I remember talking to someone about using the urgent and important matrix to prioritize stuff. And she said, well, we're not allowed to have whiteboards in the office. And I said, yeah, well, you work in an old office. You've got panel doors. They've got 4 panels. Just stick your Post-its on the door and use the 4 corners. But just that idea of you have a system, getting it up and visible to you, to your team, it just brings it to life. And then, of course, you can huddle around it and do stuff, which is the next step.
I think it's a really important point that you made about how just the getting it out of our heads sometimes, it doesn't give us, like, I don't remember the stress researcher, but he says you don't have to have control over a situation to reduce the stress, but perceived control helps. And I feel like, I feel like when we get it out there, it's like, okay, now we know what's going on. And it's so funny because my wife, every once in a while, like she doesn't know what a Kanban board is, but she'll go, hey, can we just do that sticky note thing? Because I'm just like, I'm feeling like there's all this stuff going on, and we'll do it. We'll, like, we've got, sometimes it's on a panel door, sometimes it's on a wall, but there's just something about the kind of like the settle us down a bit. I think that's a really good point, Mike.
Yeah. Brilliant. So we've got our information kind of out there to view. What's the second tool that you're going to recommend to us? Right.
So what I was thinking was, what tool am I in, or do I use on a weekly basis, if not daily? And though I'm sure it's not going to be original these days, I find our team uses Miro, M-I-R-O, and there's other virtual whiteboards, but we have found that it just because we're geographically dispersed and including over an ocean, and so time zones and stuff, it just having, even if we were face to face, we might try to capture some of that stuff, even in a tool. But the fact that we're so dispersed, it's just having a central point. And we found that it just works brilliantly. It's reliable. We've had situations where we've had like hundreds of people on at the same time. Most of the time it's not. Most of the time we're kind of doing it just, I'll do updates, another person will do an update, but it's just a good, reliable tool. Would you have a favorite whiteboarding tool, virtual whiteboarding
actually,
tool?
I've used Miro for quite a while, and I've used it to facilitate sessions as well, because it gets you quite close to that real whiteboard sticky note thing. People can interact. Miro is great if you have a parallel communication channel, if you want that parallel channel, or if you're working asynchronously. But I've recently been introduced to a tool called Creately, which is kind of like Miro and Zoom had a child. And so basically you can run your video call in the bottom of the Creately window, so you don't have to be on two platforms simultaneously. Now, full disclosure, Creately came to me and said, take a look at this. So we haven't got any commercial arrangement or anything. And I would say that in terms of its graphics and its kind of feel of its thing, I think Miro is still ahead. I like using Miro. I think the way you can lay things out in Miro, once you get used to it, the ability to create quite sophisticated graphics is fantastic. But Creately is getting there as well. And like you said, Trello is one of many tools that do Kanban. Miro, Creately are two of many tools that do this whiteboarding stuff. And if you get caught in an argument about whose tool's better, you've missed the point.
Right,
get out there, use the tool, specify what you need, and find the one you like best of the ones that do what you need.
Maybe the one that's most supported internally too, like has the ITs on board or whatever. But I've used Mural as well, and I think the tool best is probably the one you're going to use the most. But
exactly,
Mural's has helped us so much.
Well, if the team is comfortable with it, that extra. Well, for most of us, it's that extra 80% of functionality that we never use. It doesn't matter whether it does this, this, and this if we actually only ever use this tiny little slither, which we tend to do. Most software is overspec because people love the extra functionality, but then they don't go on to use it. Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I love that. So we've got our 3 tips. We've got our 2 tools. Now my favorite bit, because for most of us, there has been one moment, one insight, one discovery, one lesson learned that has changed so much in our careers, in our perspective on project management. What is that one thing for you, Andy?
I remember when I was first introduced to project management, and it was through a class, and it was very much about the tools involved and about the structure, the technical side of project management. And I don't remember when exactly the clouds parted and the sun came through but at some point, what became really clear is that the dirty little secret of business is that everything comes down to relationships.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like I was taught that in school. I don't feel like I was taught that in most of my project management related classes. I had a son who took an undergrad class in project management, and it was the most boring, irrelevant academic take on project management. That one CIO told me this. He said, the source of my greatest joys is the source of my greatest pains. It's people. And really embedded in what he was saying was that it's often not always, but it's often not the technical challenge. It's the people. In fact, earlier this week, I gave a keynote at NASA, and you know what the issues were? They have huge technical challenges in a space agency. It's the people. Yeah. It is the relationships across, and certainly a pandemic has made that a little bit more difficult. Maybe by the time this is out, that's old history, hopefully. But still, whether we're stuck behind a camera, whether we're in an office, you could argue in many ways that job number 1 is relationship building. Yeah. It's not simply making sure our stakeholder register is sparkly. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, it's people who do the work, and it's people who we're doing the work for. So there's not a lot else. Then there's the work, but people who do the work and people we do the work for. That's 2/3 of the 3 things that make up a project.
Yeah, and you and I talked about difficult stakeholders in a previous conversation, but it's like you can unfriend people on social media, but you can't unfriend a boss, right? You can't unfriend that person over in marketing or whatever. And so it's learning how to navigate that. And, based on what I do for a living, you might think that I'm an extrovert, but I'm not. I'm not by nature an extrovert.
Yeah.
But I personally benefited a lot from the discussions about ambiverts. Like if you're more on the introverted side, there's times where you need to stretch. In this meeting, you need to do this. So I don't look forward to going to a networking meeting. I mean, I would rather just be homesick, but it's don't think of it as a network meeting. Think of this as this is an opportunity to build relationships, not just for utilitarian purposes, for my own benefit, but I might meet somebody that I can connect with somebody else. And I mean, there's all kinds of benefits to doing this. So getting more comfortable with relationship building is not a neat idea. It's not a nice idea. It's not an idea for just when I have time. In many respects, it's my job.
It's your job, yeah. Absolutely. And it is an perhaps overused cliche, but it's 100% true that project management is 80% communication. And who are we communicating with?
Right.
If you don't have a relationship, then you're not going to succeed in communicating, really. Communication is how you build the relationships. And it's the means by which we feed those relationships.
That's such a good point, because you could update a dashboard and call that communication, but it's the how do we work through the relationships to help them understand why the dashboard went to red and what are we doing about it? That whole relationship and building trust, like we've talked about already. So it's just critical.
But go back to Aristotle. It's even simpler than that. You update the relationship. The first question someone's going to ask is, why should I bother to read update dashboard? Why should I bother to read your dashboard? If you don't establish that relationship and that trust and that sense that you are someone of character and therefore your dashboard matters, then they're not even going to look at it. And how many times have you heard about a project that's implemented something and the stakeholders have gone, nah.
Right. Yeah. No, that's actually a good point. Why do we get promoted? It's because someone's like, I could see Mike. I feel comfortable with Mike in that role. Right. It leads to career opportunities. It leads to opportunities to take on a bigger project because people go, I trust her. I know that she can do this. It's just underpins everything that we do. And it's obvious. I feel like it's just as an obvious point, like everything comes down to relationships. But what I see too often is people go, I don't have time.
Yeah.
I don't have time.
Yeah.
And I guess we were arguing here, you don't have time not to.
Yeah. And I've always thought, since perhaps one of my earliest insights was around what is your role as a project manager? It is not to do stuff. It is to manage and lead. And so, get your team doing stuff and then get out there and be with your team, be with your stakeholders. You made that analogy that, a risk is something you can smell. You need to be out there smelling the wind.
Yeah, that's it. That's right. Yeah, I smell your smell. Yeah.
Otherwise,
or I don't. Or I don't. Help me understand why I don't. It could be that too.
Yeah. So that is a really nice tip. Actually, these basic things are what matters. You can learn all the fancy stuff you like, but if you don't have those basics nailed, then the fancy stuff, it's just like putting icing on a stale cake. It's just nobody's going to eat it. Absolutely. So I really like those tips. Andy, before I say thank you formally, if people want to hear more from you, if they want to hear your podcast, engage with you, what are the best ways they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, two ways come to mind. The podcast is the easiest. So your favorite podcast app, go to People and Projects Podcast, and it focuses on really what we just got done talking about. It's the people side of project management. Yeah. So that's one. And then we have an initiative called Lead 52, which you get one email a week. You read it in 5 minutes or less. And it's a leadership thing that our whole global community is focused on that week. Yeah. And so I'm working on the same thing as everyone else. So it's Get Lead 52, LEAD, getlead52.com. And so between the podcast and Lead 52, it's a great way to follow. Fantastic. Well, we'll put those in the description. We'll put them on screen. In fact, they've probably been on screen now. So all that remains is to say, Andy Kaufman, thank you very much for your fantastic ideas. I value all of our interactions, Mike. Thank you.